Welcome to the DNN Town Hall. I'm Todd and I'll be your host. And today we're talking about how in the past decade, media has changed dramatically. And we're joined today by Sumit and Dondre from DNN in New Jersey, and also by Tom Law, and he's joining us from Brussels today. So I wanted to start off with a bit of an introduction from you, Tom, and who you are, what you do, and let us know what you do.
Thanks, Todd. I work for the Ethical Journalism Network. We're a network of over 60 media groups, press councils, press freedom groups, media development groups across the world. And we were established 4 years ago because our founder, a guy called Aidan White, who for 25 years was the General Secretary of the International Federation of Journalists, he recognized that there was this gap to talk about ethics and standards. And when he first conceived of the idea, the question was more about the financial issues affecting the news industry. 4 years on, it's much more about trust and about the survival of the industry, not just from a financial point of view, but just on the point of, are they legitimate in the eyes of audiences? So that's the EJN, and we'll talk a bit more about us later. About myself, so I'm a journalist. I worked as a journalist in East Africa for a few years. My first job was with in journalism at a startup newspaper in Khartoum for South Sudanese. That was a really fascinating and eye-opening experience about all the challenges that are faced in parts of the world where we don't enjoy the same freedoms as we do here in Europe or in the US. And so since then I've worked as a freelance journalist, I've worked in communications for charities, I've worked as a teacher, and then I've ended up working for the Ethical Journalism Network. And my role is basically to create resources for journalists when they're training, to conduct campaigns on issues of hate speech, on misinformation, combating propaganda, and meeting journalists around the world, doing training, doing workshops, understanding what it's like to be a journalist now with all the challenges that are faced, especially with all the challenges of digital platforms and how you reach your audiences and how you stand out from the crowd with so much other content online. And so we try and find ways for journalism to build that trust, and that could be through self-regulation, it could be through media literacy efforts and other things. So that's a short summary of what I've been doing and what the network does.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tom. I wanted to start off our conversation today with a very simple question, but really the basis of our conversation today and really the basis of much of what you do, Tom, and that is, in your view, what is ethical journalism and why is it important? And I'll start off with Tom and then go on to Sumit and Dondre after that.
Sure. Well, it's a big question. I mean, the core values of ethical journalism as we see it can be summarized in 5 points. I mean, there are ethical codes everywhere around the world, some better than others, but there are hundreds of them, but they can be boiled down to 5 things. Number 1, accuracy, so fact-based communication. Number 2, independence, so no propaganda. When I mean independence, I mean the journalists themselves and the media outlet in terms of being independent from the advertisers that might sustain their journalism, or from the owners if they're being bankrolled by a businessman or an oligarch or whatever. Thirdly, impartiality. And we don't talk about objectivity because we find that philosophically problematic. So impartiality, as we see it, means telling all sides of the story necessary for that particular story, that particular item. It might be 2 sides, might be 3, might be 4, but in that you have to give appropriate weight to the opinions based on how factual they are and how far they can be verified, not just because they shout the loudest. Number 4, humanity. So that's doing no harm. And within that, you're thinking about things around privacy, you're thinking about not instigating violence by just perhaps quoting a politician out of context and not really explaining the motivations behind what they're doing. And number 5, accountability. And this is the one that I find often missed. When I ask a group of journalists, or a group of any people, they might list some of those that I've just mentioned, but the accountability part of it is so important. And what that means is that when we make a mistake, we have to apologize, we have to correct ourselves in an appropriate way. And that means doing it prominently and very clear about how, if I make a mistake, or I publish something on my website or in my newspaper or broadcasting it, how can the audience correct me? How can they point out that's been made? And I think it's a problem that journalists have in general is really owning that and saying that is one of the things that makes us different from other kinds of communication online. And the last thing I'll say, just to summarize, is that journalism is not free speech in the sense that we put on ourselves constraints.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Paradise Papers have just been released. Great piece of journalism, collaborative, ticks so many boxes, and the kind of thing that will keep journalism sustainable in the future. But a free speech organization like WikiLeaks would have published the whole thing online and said, perhaps, use it. Everyone can use it. But the journalists said, no, we're going to take our time. Let's go a whole year to decide what was newsworthy, what was in the public interest, and what was private. And then they use that to decide what they put online. So basically, journalism is other regarding. We think about the consequences of our actions. We think about others when we choose what we publish. Whereas free expression can be biased, it can be offensive, it can be rude, and often it's very self-regarding. This is my opinion. I want to say this. Whereas as a journalist, ideally, you leave your agenda at the door, but you still bring your passions. You apply those 5 key values when you go about doing your work.
So, Sumit, I'll pose the same question to you, but maybe add in there is, what was your motivation to getting involved in this sort of fight to combat fake news and address ethical journalism?
Yeah, overall, the way I'm looking at it is, ethical journalism to me is all about taking responsibility for the type of content you put out. Like what we're seeing right now in this day and age is a really basic lack of responsibility from a lot of writers in terms of the content they put out. Whether you look at content from, let's say, something like CNN, or especially a lot of like just the big box mainstream news outlets, especially when you look at regions like the U.S., where we're essentially being pandered to by these bigger entities, there's a lack of responsibility and ownership behind the words that are being put out. And it's crazy to think about, because we're, the moment we're reading about certain issues, such as, let's take the presidential election, for example, which is actually what spurred Don and I to get into what we're doing with DNN. You have the audience being pulled in so many different directions, and it's like you almost don't know what to believe, because writers are essentially twisting everything out of proportion, or putting in a certain quote from a politician and sort of making it seem like it's out of context. And I feel like it's amongst a lot of the principles that that Tom described. They like perfectly summed everything up, because to me it's like it's everything that's missing right now when it comes to like good quality journalism, especially when you look at a lot of the discourse on bigger social channels as well. When you see, you essentially see all these, opinions coming together in one giant echo chamber, which is pretty much just, I guess, bolstering our own confirmation bias. We're living in an age where we're only exposed to more of what we want to see, or what, the networks think we want to see. And we're not being exposed to things that we may disagree with.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I think there's a huge disconnect between how news gets created and the consumption of the news. So, as a reader, when you're going to these big, news publications and you're seeing what's in their feed, I think a lot of people just take that as pure fact. They don't really think about what goes on to constructing those pieces and when they get published. And I think, one of the kind of inspirations for what we're doing with DNN is we kind of want to unveil how that process happens, and, how articles get constructed, finding the correct sources. You hear it all the time of people, playing this blame game with, they're showing fake news, like this is fake. on a Google News feed or a Facebook News feed without really taking the time to understand, why that particular thing is fake or how it came about. A lot of times we talk about algorithms, we talk about, these mechanisms for a lot of these networks to, show articles within their feed without fully understanding how that's done. With DNN, we're going to, strictly focus on this transparency and creating this, bridging the gap between the readers and the writers.
It can be argued in today's media climate that journalists are under an intensified amount of pressure to perpetually feed that news pipeline. And given the online environment right now, at times that speed trumps being right. And, ultimately, and all of three of you have addressed this really in your response to my first question, and that is that the quality of information that is shared is affected by that speed to get the news out, to get the breaking story. And so I'm wondering, Tom, if you think that it would be fair to say that ethics in journalism has unfortunately taken a back seat in recent years.
I think for some organizations that is true. For some it isn't. For example, the Financial Times of London has a motto, better to be right than first. And I think that's a very laudable one. So I think you see very different approaches. There are some which are going for a membership model where you subscribe and they'll take more time to give you digestible, good analysis, and they'll take their time. The Times of London as well is focusing, not so much on, chasing clicks on Facebook and social media, sensational headlines, because they want you to subscribe. And if you already subscribed, then there's no incentive to kind of drag you in under the false assumption that you're going to read something else. However, many media groups are trying to produce journalism and distill difficult concepts like the Brexit vote in the UK or the issue discussed in the US election into quite simplified versions of those difficult policy ideas, or make it more about the horse race of who's up and who's down, not really giving people what they need in terms of analyzing policy. So we can't generalize too much. The financial model, which used to nourish good ethical journalism, has been ripped apart. I mean, you can call it disruption. It's been completely ripped apart by the power of Google and Facebook. And so, publishers have different options. They can chase clicks on Facebook and Google, and to an extent, you might believe Facebook and Google's motivations for their financial support to journalism and what they're getting from that. I think it's very interesting to see the experiment Facebook did with their newsfeed.
Yes.
It was always somewhat ironic they called it a newsfeed when actually most of it was, your mum and dad or your mum and dad aren't on Facebook. Luckily, but your friends and family sharing whatever of their cute babies with hard news from New York Times and CNN, which you might subscribe to, you might not, or they might advertise in your feed. And then the fact that they've just experimented in Serbia and other places to see how that would work financially is really concerning, especially for somewhere like Serbia, whose independent media is getting a kicking from the policies of this of the government there on driving traffic to their site by using Facebook. And suddenly the drop that they saw, and in Slovenia as well, after this experiment, was dramatic. And it wasn't just a short experiment. Often Facebook changes this stuff for just a matter of hours to get its data, but they, with no warning, changed the whole thing. Yeah. And that puts news in a really difficult situation about how they produce good quality content that they think that the public needs to make choices in their lives, but also if they're going to rely on online advertising, need to get people clicking on those links. And so, that can be a very, that can create conflict. They're not always, compatible, unfortunately.
So I wanted to ask Simon and Dondre, based on Tom's points right there, you look in the American context right now, and all of the major media outlets and media companies in America, they're covering news in a way that is based upon the sort of 24-hour news cycle, and they want to get more and more news, and they continue to have sometimes it feels like we're even here in Canada, because we get CNN and we get a lot of American media up here, we get a lot of news about President Trump, and so but the question becomes, they constantly want to get news out about the president, but what about all the other news of the day, right? And there's always a lot of other news. In that desire and that drive to cover the most sensational news of the day, which sometimes can be the president in America, do you, and again, I pose this question to both of you, is do you think in that effort and that drive, journalism has taken a back seat?
Yeah, I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but yeah, it really has, especially considering that, like Tom was saying earlier, Google and Facebook account for such an immense amount of control over the news that we read on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of it comes down to corporate interests and this whole prevailing ad model of today. I feel like ad revenue has distorted incentives for writers, for readers, for publishers, because now it's all about, the basic metrics, eyeballs, click-throughs, so on and so forth. Every single action of yours as a reader is being tracked and essentially being fed to their algorithms, and they tweak everything accordingly. And it's just incredible to see. Just a couple of years ago, I think it was a couple of years ago, Facebook was they were running this experiment to see the effect of us as users to seeing things that we dislike on Facebook. So every now and then, if we're looking through our newsfeed and seeing, let's say, okay, it's a friend's birthday today, and seeing anything else that we like on a day-to-day basis, Facebook would then input something that they think we would dislike, something that would shock or horrify us within our own feed. And the effect of that was they saw users spending a very small amount of less time on Facebook because they were seeing more and more things that they disliked, because that's what Facebook was showing them, which then led to the conclusion that, okay, so being Facebook, if I show you as a user more things that I think you'll like, you'll spend more and more time on Facebook. So now it's really become this game of this race of just capturing engagement and then holding it in a very ruthless manner. So it's like, it's getting to the point now that, as far as ethical journalism is concerned, a lot of those core principles have gone out the window in favor of big ad revenue and keeping us on board for a longer time. Because now that we're in this, quick, rapid 24-hour news cycle, it's all about who can capture our attention for the longest time, because there's so many players in this game and everyone's vying for a certain amount of your attention as a reader. And, the likes of Google, the likes of Twitter, Facebook, so on and so forth, they all want to capture you for as long as they possibly can so they can squeeze out that drop of ad revenue, essentially. And it's crazy because it does have a noticeable impact on, A, how we perceive the facts, and B, the type of news we care about, because we are being shifted to reading more and more about sensationalistic news. It's not a single day goes by where you don't see something about Trump, right? But like you said, there are so many other things going on in any given day, but a lot of news articles, won't cover those topics necessarily in favor of more sensationalistic press.
Yeah, I think it comes down also to kind of how the network is structured. I think a lot of us forget that, prior to the internet, the way news was constructed was a lot different. It was through, proper newspapers that had classified sections that they would use to get revenue. And, there's a lot more going on to making sure that what was being published within those newspapers was reflected as factual as possible, at least within where that newspaper was going out. So when you look at kind of how the network has shifted, now you have these networks like, Facebook and Google, where they're not rewarding the amount of time and effort that goes into making sure that what's being published is as factual as possible.
Yep.
So one of the things about DNN is that we're focusing on ensuring that we create a network that rewards people for being more factual and in constructing articles.
So I wanted to ask you, Tom, based on your experience in the past as a journalist, how is the obligation for to report ethical and accurate stories changed with that growing demand for news?
Well, I think it works in two ways. And one, as a freelancer, in terms of the stories that you pitch to editors, you're very aware of what they will and won't take. And also within the newsrooms, the people that I've spoken to who are working, not that the journalists themselves don't want to live up to the aspirations of their profession. It's that they are often being asked to produce too many stories a day.
Right.
That's to fulfill this churn. There are some. We need to be careful not to generalize too much, because there are some media houses who have found a way to fund really good investigative journalism, and you either go for really high quality stuff and you're charging premium for it, or there's a trend of going chasing clicks. So it does depend on each newsroom. One of the things that we've been doing and what we've realized is that there is great value in training journalists, but actually unless you have an ethical newsroom, an ethical boardroom, and you have transparency around who owns the company, the company is clear about what their mission is. So if you have a political take, if you have an agenda, then let's have it really clear and open so audience can see it. Let's not try and pretend that you're trying to be a straight down the line media company when actually you have an agenda. So I have no problem with any company having left to center, right of center, focusing on green issues, focusing on constructive journalism or advocacy journalism, or even opinion. So long as it's separate, as long as it's clear that it's being separated from when you're trying to do journalism. I mean, I try not to, but when I do watch those huge panels on CNN with 10 talking and shouting at each other, that's a lot of heat and not much light. And what we really need from newsrooms is to, think about, is the way that they're structured editorially going to create the atmosphere where journalists can report independently or not? And if you can create that atmosphere, much more likely that they'll be able to do their job and live up to the ethical standards which all journalists want to live up to. It's not that the majority of journalists want to live up to the values and the standards of the profession that we've developed over time. It's just that circumstances, and issues of self-censorship and red lines and everything else can become an issue when there's not a clear firewall between editorial and who's paying, or the being buffeted with the kind of political wins and narratives of the day and overcompensating, using the euphemism of populism to describe a lot of the words, the narratives that Trump was using to get elected, and not actually using more descriptive words such as being discriminatory, sometimes racist, sometimes homophobic, sometimes you have to not just use these simple phrases to fall back on. You actually have to describe what do we mean by the alt-right. What do we mean when we talk about these very troubling, movements and political developments? And so, I think that journalists are trying to do a good job on the whole. It's just that we need to make sure they have the tools, the time, the resources, and the editorial freedom to do their job properly.
Yep.
And so we haven't touched on this yet, but consumers of news and the general public play a really big role in consuming that news and responding to it. And there's a sense of almost apathy in recent years towards consuming source news. And so I'm curious, Sumit, how do you suggest current journalism standards might be playing a part in that? And sort of a follow-up question to that is maintaining a strong set of ethics in journalism helping to address the issue? And if so, how?
The way I'm looking at it right now is I don't necessarily think that readers themselves have become apathetic to the presence of facts, at least not the facts themselves. I feel like, as readers, most of us don't know much better because we're sort of just being fed, this endless pipeline of content and just sort of like passively sifting through everything, which has in turn made us, more and more, I guess, passive to facts themselves. But I don't necessarily think that factual news isn't it's definitely a selling point for readers, but it really comes back to what Tom was saying in terms of like things have to change in the newsroom. Things have to change with the way the news itself is created before it's delivered to the readers, for the readers to even have a better idea of the type of content that they're looking through. The problem right now is everything that I'm reading on a daily basis, there's clear bias, but the content creators themselves aren't upfront about said bias. And as a reader, it makes me feel even more confused about about a given topic, because then I have to sift through like different perspectives, explore opposite opinions to understand an issue better. I shouldn't have to sift through like 20 different sources on one single topic just to get a better view or an angle or perspective of how I feel about that issue. Biases should always be very clear, and people should be upfront about them, because I do think the admittance of bias is really more of a strength, because it's a victory in terms of transparency, which we're lacking right now. There is very little transparency, and I do feel like admitting that your article is maybe prejudiced is the wrong word, but like biased to an extent, and why it's biased, like what's your staked interest in presenting such a perspective on a certain topic. Like you need to be upfront as a content creator on where this bias is coming from and why it's there, to drive that overall transparency for the reader to better understand why you're presenting an issue the way you're presenting it. I think this lack of admittance is making us as readers actually less informed. It's having like the opposite effect and sort of just confusing us more about what we read. And with DNN, we always talk about like how we want to make sense of what people are reading, and writers need to be sort of just again upfront about their interests in a topic. And that's definitely one of the biggest things as far as ethical journalism is concerned, to be upfront about about why you feel a certain way about the issue you're writing about. Because, especially when you look at mainstream media, that's one of the biggest things I feel that we're lacking right now in a lot of the articles that we read. It's just words being twisted, certain facts being put in an article to give it a certain tilt, but there's no upfront admittance of any of that.
And Tom, I was going to ask you, if you had advice for consumers of news wanting to ensure that they're reading accurate news articles, what advice do you have for them to being that active and engaged reader of news? Tom, did you hear that question? Tom, can you hear us? We're just having some technical issues with Tom at the moment, and in the meantime,
yeah, it's starting to cut out. But your question, I think, was what advice do I have for news consumers?
Did you hear that question, Tom?
Yeah. So advice to consumers. Well, I'll start by asking them, how easy is it to overcome? if you go on their website, can you find their code of ethics? Is that published?
Right.
Can you find out who owns their company? Can you find out who the shareholder is, who shareholders are, who the editor-in-chief is? Is there an easy way to submit a correction or ask them to correct something if something is wrong? Is the process clear about how they will deal with that complaint when you make? Media companies will have, you'll be able to find that information very easily, and I have a very good system in place. And if it's not there, then I'd say to news organizations, why isn't it there? Why isn't it clear to your readers how you regulate yourself? Why isn't it clear to your readers, if you're part of a wider self-regulatory body, that if you can't resolve the issue with them directly, you can go to the press regulators like we have in the UK and many parts of the world. They're regulators for the press. In America, it's a different system. This is often a very good way to do it. For the audience themselves, I had to be encouraging them to ask themselves, what is the agenda behind this? Is it, or what is the purpose? Are they trying to inform me? Are they trying to do something?
I think we are having technical issues with Tom at the moment.
Are they being self-serving by
I'm going to ask
talking about it in this way?
D'Andre and Sumit, we have a few questions from the audience. The first one is from William Sterling, and he writes, quality news has never equated to viewership. How do you plan to compete against sensationalism when the majority of the public prefer entertainment to truth?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends, on the type of people that we want on DNN. I mean, we definitely want people that are interested in facts. I mean, there's a variety of other sources you can get entertainment from. However, the type of kind of mindset that we want people to have when they're on DNN is, finding truth in the articles that get published on our system. So, I guess when it comes to viewership, that's not like one of our main concerns. Viewership will come through the activity that happens on the platform, whether it's through the form of reviewers or editors. If you look at a system like Wikipedia, those same questions don't really raise it. You don't really think about Wikipedia in the sense of viewerships. That's like the wrong way to put it in that term. So we kind of want people to think like that when it comes to DNN. Viewership's going to be a byproduct of this, but the main focus is on the construction of the articles and, making sure they're as factual as possible.
One of the things I do want to point out, just adding to what D'Andre says, as far as, sensationalism is concerned, it's definitely true that obviously sensationalistic articles attract more eyeballs and therefore engagement. We've seen that. The stats are there. But, something I do want to point out is it really comes down to the beauty of the blockchain, where readers will be more engaged, on a platform like DNN versus more traditional platforms and social media platforms, because they'll play a direct part in shaping the news that comes to light on DNN. For example, readers will be able to suggest topics for writers to write about and basically earning a sort of reward, on the chain itself. Readers will also be able to, see any and all revisions that have been made in the history of an article being published on the blockchain in the spirit of transparency. And so there's that added layer of interaction, which you don't get with traditional media outlets. And, the blockchain provides us all those benefits.
You're totally right. And fortunately, we have Tom back. Seems to be all the technical difficulties hopefully are dealt with. Tom, I just started taking questions from the audience, and we had a question about from a viewer by the name of William Sterling, who wrote, "Quality news has never equated to viewership. How do you plan?" This question is probably more for DNN, but how do media companies, in your mind, compete against that drive for sensationalism that other media outlets are driven to do?
So was that to me?
Yeah, you, John.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there was of, good quality journalism actually finding a large viewership, and you can get really good journalism that covers, topics that are to the public. It is much harder to do. It requires a lot of thinking about how you go about it. But I don't think necessarily it's a simple choice of either you dumb down your content for some sections of the public, or you go for very high-end journalism. I think it is definitely possible to be a really good quality, informative tabloid journalist and tabloid newspaper, or an online version of that. It's also possible to be, a very feisty, partial, online presence or newspaper, and still do a really good job of informing people and having, a campaigning element to what you do. As long as you're transparent about your agenda, I don't really see a problem in that.
Yeah.
What is happening now is that journalists at a young age are having to make a choice between, am I going to be one of those opinion advocacy journalists who take a really strong stand on some issues and everyone knows my politics, or am I going to try and be adhere to the more traditional values of journalism that I articulated at the start of the show. And I think it's possible to be both, as long as you're clear about who you are and where you're coming from. If you do have an agenda, that's absolutely fine. But you have to be clear about it. I think it is possible to do really good, high-quality journalism that does have a popular appeal. But that is not. It's not easy to do. But there are examples of where that has succeeded, and I think we need to try and redouble our efforts to support that. And as consumers ourselves, we have to look at when was the last time I actually paid for a newspaper or subscribed to a website that I regularly use online, which hasn't already put up a paywall. We can actually make changes ourselves, and I think that media companies who want to communicate proactively about why you should trust us, why you should pay for our journalism, and be very clear about why they're independent, about how they self-regulate themselves and everything else, they'll have much more of a chance to make sure that they actually do become financially sustainable and do produce the kind of journalism that our societies need.
We have another question from a viewer, Tom, and I'll start with you, Tom, and then maybe Dondra, you can answer it as well. The question is from Andy Payne, and he asks, how do you think journalists are viewing emerging technology like blockchain to tackle issues like ethics and move beyond guiding principles?
I don't know yet. I think that it'll be interesting. I think there'll be some skepticism initially. I think there'll be many questions about exactly how it works. But I think that if Sam and Andre are able to demonstrate and really show people, with case studies, then I think that skepticism, might increase. At the end of the day, using a blockchain technology like they're proposing with DNN, you still need good people who are acting independently and fact-checking on every step of the process. So I think that that will be very reassuring to many journalists, the fact that you're not removing them from the equation. There are still human eyes on this content, fact-checking it. There's peer review, the same kind of process that go in a newsroom when you're checking your copy before you publish. It gets seen by a sub, it gets seen by maybe another colleague. You talk about the choices you've made with your editor, and eventually you publish. So it's not a completely dissimilar process which a blockchain technology will use, and that's why it's distinguished from artificial intelligence or from algorithms, which a human creates it and then it's left to almost have a life of its own until it gets out of hand, then the human has to intervene again. So I think if it's explained in that way, and obviously it needs to be tested, needs to be used, needs to be demonstrated that it works. But if you guys can produce examples and show people, how this isn't another technical fix to solve what are fundamentally human problems in terms of our own biases and our willingness to put them upon other people, as long as this is technology which is giving people who want to produce factual information, which could be trusted, as long as it's seen from that point of view, I think that some of those skepticisms could be addressed. But Samit, Dondri, over to you about how you think this will work.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the whole focus with DNN is just how do we get more people involved? And I think what we realized about the blockchain is, it's this technology that allows us to, kind of condition people's behaviors and behaving in a certain way. And in this particular case, it's, constructing these articles and going through this kind of rigorous review process that involves everybody. So if you look at traditional networks like Facebook and all of that, their whole technology does not include the people using it at all. It's just, there's these teams, they build these algorithms behind the scene, and then, there you go, it puts out, content. But with DNN, everything is transparent. I mean, that's one of the things about the blockchain that's so appealing, is everything on the blockchain is transparent. So the very nature of the blockchain just goes very nicely with DNN's, whole mission. So, when articles get submitted to the network, all of that is transparent. The editorial guidelines that the writers are using is also transparent. So, everything could be, questioned from all different sides. And then one thing I'd like to add as well is that, the review process is never ending, right? So it's just, articles go through a review system. The reader at a later time can point out inaccuracies. So it's this constant thing. So, the technology that DNN is trying to capitalize on, the blockchain, it's not meant to substitute people at all. It's actually to get more people involved in the process.
And Tom, I just wanted to ask you, in terms of technology, even outside of blockchain, are there uses for technology to help combat fake news in the world right now? Are there ways that technology can do that other than blockchain?
There are. I mean, I would recommend that viewers check out Full Fact. They're based in London. They're a fact-checking organization, and they're trying to create a kind of an automated fact-checking system, so that there are some pieces of misinformation that politicians and others repeat live on TV all the time, and some of them are new. Some of them that they bring them up from a year ago,
yep.
And the journalist interviewing them has a real struggle to go back into their, the depths of their memory and trying to remember this is fact on this topic, or this value, or this and everything else. What Full Fact are trying to do, have memory problems, and they've already done the fact check on them. So, but they can actually almost in real time give the journalist the fact check on that statement. And so that's actually a very interesting way of making fact-checking have a much longer life cycle, rather than you move on, you try and debunk the falsehood, or you do verify it if it's a true statement. And this will actually make it far easier for journalists to fact-check politicians, and you could well see the scroller on the bottom of the screen when doing the TV interview or the interview online like this,
right.
Mm-hmm. And it would just say, Tom Law just stated this fact. We fact-checked this in 2016 and found it not to be true. Mm-hmm. So right. That technology is being developed. I think that projects like that could be very valuable. But obviously there isn't a technical solution to everything, but we can find ways for technology to play a very positive role.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add, because when you brought that technology up, so So in our review process, I guess one of the things that we've always got the question about is, does your reviewers have enough tools to figure out if something is factual or not? And we always tell them that, we give the reviewers the directive to, check other sources and make sure that, the sources are reputable based on our editorial guidelines. But kind of one of the things that we envision down the line is incorporating these additional tools that they can use on, flagging something right away, like, okay, this source has been debunked in these other locations. Rather than having the reviewer, go to every single source, they can kind of use this new technology to help them kind of reach a decision.
So I have one really quick last question, and trying to answer it and fill in the sentence, if you will. Journalism is important because, and we'll start with you, Tom.
Journalism is important because it endeavors to give people the information they need to make important choices in their lives. And that could be an election, local or national level, or it could be where they can get safe water. It's as simple as that. It gives people information they need to make better choices.
How about you, Sumit?
Agreed. Journalism is important because it empowers us with the knowledge that's necessary, for us to carry on with, not only the choices we make, but to, form our own individually thought out opinions on how we feel about certain issues going on in the world. Without that external source of knowledge, how do we know how we're supposed to feel about things going on in the world which we wouldn't otherwise know about? And, not only does that influence our, the actions we take on a daily basis, but also our overall mindset, about life and the world around us.
Yeah, and I would say, it's just an overall movement that seeks truth. So, a lot of us tend to want to figure out what's going on. And I think journalism allows us to, ask those questions and figure out the reality behind them.
I really wanted to thank all of you for participating in this important conversation about ethics in journalism. And just before we wrap up, I wanted to give a chance for all of you to let anyone watching know how they get in touch with you. So, and for you, Tom, how do people get in touch with you and the Ethical Journalism Network?
Sure. So on Twitter, I'm Tom Law Media, at Tom Law Media. You can find the Ethical Journalism Network at EJ Network on Twitter. If you search for us in your favorite search engine, Ethical Journalism Network, you'll find us. Do have a newsletter that goes there every week, which summarizes the latest news about what we're doing and in terms of media ethics more widely. So I'd encourage you to sign up. And just as a final note, because we do pride ourselves on our transparency, I just want to tell the audience that I'm taking part in this discussion just because I find it very interesting. I wanted to learn more about DNN and have this discussion, and that EGN has received, or myself received, no finances or no fee for taking part. But it's been a really interesting discussion. I hope we can carry on having these debates. So thank you both for inviting me, and thank you, Todd, for inviting me.
D'Andre and Sumit, how do people engage with you? And we definitely, need to continue this conversation, not just today, but, ongoing. I continue this conversation. So how do people get in touch with DNN guys, and how do people support the work that you're doing?
Yep. First and foremost, the best place to conversate with us is our Slack channel, slack.dnn.media. We're always super active, D'Andre and I, and willing to answer just about any question that anyone shoots at us through Slack. That's where most of the conversation takes place. Twitter is also great. DNN_blockchain is our Twitter handle, and pretty much all the other resources and information aside from our Telegram channel is also on our website, dnn.media. And in terms of support, I'd just like to, quickly add, we will be gearing up for a token sale very soon. We'll be running a private pre-sale, perhaps followed by a crowd sale, and we'll have more details on that very, very soon for anyone who's interested in and happy to participate in that.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, DNN's, very much about the community. So from development, from thinking of ideas, if you have any suggestions, we welcome them.
So thank you everyone for watching. And just again, for everybody, please get in touch with DNN, definitely by their website, dnn.media. And we will be having another one of these town halls on Friday, November the 24th, again at 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. And please, if you have any other comments, questions, or want to continue this conversation, make sure you get in touch with either DNN or with Tom Law, and let's continue this conversation. And to everybody watching, thank you, and we'll see you all soon.